Welcome to Sparking Success with Aaron Opalewski. Aaron brings you conversations that spark innovation, cultivate leadership skills, and pave the way for your business success. In each episode, we delve into the dynamic world of business and leadership, exploring strategies, insights, and success stories that fuel your professional journey. Well, hey, everybody. Welcome back to Sparking Success. My name is EJ, and I'm joined with my good friend, Aaron. Aaron, how you doing today, man?
Great, man. How are you?
I'm doing good. We were laughing before this set of filming because it's been a busy week here at Spark Companies, but a great week. And as we wrap up this full week, we're excited for the next one. And on today's episode, we're going to talk about 4 of the top lessons that you've learned that you want to share with other entrepreneurs, business leaders out there today. And Aaron, I know that the wealth of knowledge that you have, you could probably share 150 of these. But I kind of said, Aaron, let's reel it in a little bit. Yeah. You're like, how about we do 15? And I was like, no. And then you go, maybe we should only do 3. And I go, that's where it's at. But we nailed it down to 4.
You noticed I switched it to 4.
I did, but that's okay. And the reason I love that is because what you share with the folks who are listening, who are watching, it's always based on your experience, and it's not this big, ethereal thing. And today you have lessons that you've learned from mentors, friends of yours, some that you've seen up close and interacted, and some that are near and dear to you because of your faith. And I'm excited for you to share that. Why talk about lessons that you've learned over the years and share that with other people?
Well, for me, if I would have learned some of these things quicker that we'll talk about, I think it would have just been helpful.
Yeah.
Or I know it would have been helpful. So
yeah.
It's interesting, too, as we're doing this, it's like there's just a ton, or even like the people that we're going to, mention, today, like, well, there's a ton that I've learned from those people. When I'm thinking about it, it's like, hey, like, well, what has been the most impactful? What have you used the most? What's like most current, for you right now, knowing that this can like evolve and change.
Yeah.
So I don't know, it was an interesting thing to prepare a little bit for.
Right. Yeah. You kind of get a little bit of, introspection going on. Mm-hmm. You start looking, you start saying, man, if I'm going to narrow these down to a couple of big ones, which ones do I want to narrow them down to, at least for this episode?
Yeah.
And I'll just kick off, and I want you to share a little bit about one of your mentors, a guy who you learned a ton from. Why don't you explain who that is and what you learned from him?
Yeah, so the first business lesson that we want to get into was one that I was blessed to learn really before my recruiting career started.
Got it.
I think it was after my interview.
Okay.
And so the person that kind of got me set up and referred me to interview, his name's James O'Neill.
Okay.
So we worked together at Aerotech, and now it's Ace Talent. I believe I'm saying that right. He's still there, to this day.
Okay.
And we talked about him without, saying his name in a previous podcast where we did some training sessions together, got to know each other, and ultimately got this interview. Well, I can remember vividly, we had a couple pretty impactful conversations, but one we had after I had interviewed, accepted the job, and before I started, he talked to me, and this is what I'm paraphrasing, right? But this is what I remember from the conversation. He said, Aaron, let me give you a few pointers on how to be a great recruiter. I said, okay, I'm listening. It's like, you're going to get a set of KPIs. Make sure you understand them and that you overachieve on them. Okay? Focus on your contacts. Like, that's going to be your most controllable one. Make sure you always make all your contacts. You're going to get some other things, but start there, right? Okay. You're going to see a lot of good examples of how to be a good recruiter, and you're also going to see bad examples,
right,
from what you learn in your training and things that are off kind of the path of what you're taught in training. Pay attention to both. Learn from both.
Love it.
But make sure you fall back on these key fundamentals, these KPIs. We kind of went through some of those things, and that you focus on getting really good at those, because that's how you control your outcomes in what we do here.
Yeah.
I said, okay. So then the other thing he said, because I really wanted to go, I wanted to get to sales as quick as could be.
Right.
And I don't remember exactly how he said it, but it stuck with me that basically to be really good in sales, or I'll say to be your best version of yourself in sales and recruiting, you should be a really good recruiter first. So it's not that certain companies don't do it differently. I mean, even us now, we have a biz dev role, but the way I would frame it, or the way that it kind of hit home to me is, hey, I know you want to be in sales, and that's great.
Yep.
Like, make that a goal. But you're going to be your best version of yourself in sales if you get really good at recruiting, because that's the core of what we do.
Got it.
Changed my life.
That's a big statement. Changed my life.
Yeah, that conversation, and that's what stuck with me over 17 years later.
Yeah.
I actually messaged him last night.
Wow.
And I told him that we'd be dropping I didn't know if we would actually get this dropped today or next week, probably next week. But
yeah.
I mean, that conversation completely changed the trajectory of my life.
Wow. I'm sure that has found itself in other arenas, not just recruiting, likely into leading a business, likely into other arenas. How's that transferable to somebody who's not in the recruiting space? I know it. I think I know what I would say, but how would you make that transferable to other people?
I mean, if I summed it up, it's like you should focus on going the extra mile in whatever you're doing.
Yeah.
And to get people that are elite at stuff are good at the fundamentals.
Yeah.
And they repeat them consistently over and over again.
Yeah. Wow.
So
that's good. The next lesson that you've learned is from a very well-known guy who both of us highly respect. You've got to interact with Andy a bit more than I have. Share what you learned from Andy.
So Andy Frisilla, it was crazy. As I knew the four things that we wanted to do.
Yeah.
And I've learned so much from Andy. I had the hardest time with like this, and it's
narrowing
not because I haven't learned a lot from him.
Yeah.
I've learned a ton,
right,
from him, but it was hard to narrow it down to like, man, like what do I think's been the most impactful? And so I went with some things that I've learned so much again, but I went with some things that it wasn't like him speaking or on his podcast.
Okay.
It was observing him in the Arte Syndicate.
Yeah.
And so what I'll say about this, and I'll try and tie this in as we go through the next one, but I watched him operate, communicate, collaborate, somewhat with what would be deemed competition.
Okay.
Or within the same industry.
Got it.
Because let's be realistic. Like we were in the Arte Syndicate, it's especially, well, it still is, but when it started, it was a group of 60 of us.
Yep.
You had to apply to get in. It was somewhat scrutinized group of entrepreneurs. So like everyone, I'm not taking away from anyone, but Andy's on a much higher level than anyone that was in the, fitness or, performance, space like that was in the room, right?
Yeah.
But they're still in that space, like in the same industry.
Yep.
And, being in staffing and kind of like the mentality of staffing still is, I think this is coming in the right direction, but it's like hold stuff very close to the vest. Don't share things with your competition. Like everything's really cutthroat and all that kind of stuff. And that's just part of being like ultra competitive, right?
Yeah.
And that's how I was trained. That's how I was wired. That's how I kind of, thought. Now I had worked on this a little bit from listening to Andy on his podcast for probably about 2 years at that point.
Okay.
But then watching it in that environment where
whole other level,
where he was, he's competitive as they come.
Yeah.
Like but he's still willing to help those people out. And I just observed how he did that.
Yep.
And, got more of an understanding that you can be ultra competitive and you can still be collaborative with people within your industry.
Right.
And so I really picked that up from him. And again, there's just probably over 1,000 things
Right.
that we could talk about, but that's something that's really just kind of stuck home and become a part of my DNA. We'll probably get into that a little bit more.
Yeah. Let me push a little bit. So, interacting with competition makes me nervous.
Mm-hmm.
And, we've talked about it a bit. You can certainly learn from those people. You can learn from their mistakes. You can learn from the things that they're doing well that maybe within the niche that you serve, you can broaden, make things a bit different. So there was a presence about Andy that you saw in that moment of how we interacted. What else about the interaction really stuck out to you?
Well, it's just how you could do that in helpful, collaborative, like in kind of like a coaching way, or like, you don't have to hold all your information in,
Right?
Because the execution's just a whole nother thing.
Got it.
Right?
Yeah.
And
you're going to separate yourself in a different way.
you're going to separate yourself in the execution.
Yeah.
Not in the theory or the conversation or the information. There's more information than ever.
Yep.
And in some instances, that's great. And in some, I think it holds people back from executing because they're always trying to take more information in rather than going out and doing.
Got it.
Somewhat, right?
Yeah.
So, I just watched how he did that.
Yeah.
And I figured out how I could do that better in my own industry.
Yep.
And it's a part, I'm going to get into the other part in a minute, but it's a part of what's became the vision of it. It's not any mistake or coincidence that at that moment when I started to observe that, how many companies do you think we had? We had one.
I was going to say two, but
no, we had one. It was
wow.
Spark Talent.
And look at now how.
Look what's happened.
Yeah.
Look at the
So
and so this was an integral, and this is why I picked this, because it's become, observing that has become key. We had our vision set, right?
Yep.
But this became a key part in how we were going to continue to grow and head towards our vision, achieving our mission, and moving forward. And now we sit here with these 7 entities that work together
Yep.
Towards this one mission, and that really wasn't on my radar at that point.
Wow.
So I just looked at things differently up until that. And again, it wasn't a light switch thing. This was an evolution. That
Right.
was part 1.
Yeah.
You want to hear part 2?
I do, baby. Come on, give it to me.
So part 2.
I feel like just to stop you real quick. I feel like I want to crawl out of my chair right now. Like I'm super stoked for this. I'm jacked. Like better than a Red Bull. Let's go.
So part 2 was also from being involved in the Arte Syndicate.
Yep.
Was something that I learned from Ed.
Okay.
So Ed Milet.
Yep.
And so I observed that same thing in Ed that I just talked about it, but I watched it more. There's a lot of fitness people that ended up in that group. So
Right.
I observed that the most with Andy in that.
Yep.
Well, I don't remember exactly. It might have been year 1. It might have been a little bit later on, but a lot of people have heard this, but it's just become immensely impactful for me, is that your vision, Ed says this, other people say it too and try and steal it or say it in a different way, but I'm make sure you get
Yeah, I
his credit on
appreciate
this.
you giving the credit where it's due.
Your vision has to be big enough to fit other people's vision inside of it.
Yeah.
And so you take this lesson on collaboration that I really observed from Andy,
Yep.
and then you match it with that. And you look at what we're doing, you got to understand that like those two things have become core foundational things to how we've expanded to 7 companies, how we've more, when we sat, at that point, in that conversation, like in the first year, we've almost tripled in size.
Yeah.
From that standpoint. We were just talking about this earlier this week. We are doing some great things. We continue to grow, but we see our gaps on where we have, challenges or just room for improvement. And it's just like, hey, like we got the roast in the oven. We got this isn't the perfect example because there's a lot of work to do on it, right?
Yep.
But like things need to bake.
Yeah.
It's why we're not adding more companies to the portfolio right now.
Yeah,
we're
you're more
focused
in
on these 7.
Yeah.
Because the runway on what we're doing and how these niche companies work together to support clients, candidates, each other, like we're all in on this right now.
Yeah.
It's why I'm not traveling outside of work. It's what, like, again, there's an art, I'm being very complimentary of the RTA Syndicate, and there's an event coming up this month. I would love to go.
Got it.
However, I've made a commitment to myself and to the organizations that no travel for like anything like that this year.
Got it.
Seasons for everything.
Yep.
And right now the season is on pouring everything into these, portfolio companies to keep us down the line of continuing to grow.
Yeah.
But those two gentlemen, with those two things we discussed, were just integral in me getting that vision out of my head.
Yeah.
And into reality.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's where it's like, hey, part of that's become, we have 15 equity partners now. And so it's a mix of those two things together.
Yep.
Collaboration with other people in the industry. And the vision has to be big enough to fit other people's visions inside of it. And I think that we had that I could sit here and tell you, like, we're going to create 100,000 opportunities.
Right.
But when we're sitting down and we're talking about even like putting both together, and you have this vision, that vision fits inside of the vision.
Right, right. And, I think, I've only been a part of, the Spark companies, a portfolio of companies for roughly 6 months now. And I have seen a stark difference with how I've seen companies interact within portfolios, right? I think one of the unique things that you've done within this, and I'm going to get to a point here. I usually don't talk too much, but I feel like this is good for our people to hear. What I've seen is all of your businesses that you're either the managing partner in or, within the portfolio of companies specifically, they could step on each other's toes. But instead, the point that you're making, and I want all of you to hear this, is that you've chosen to help them to collaborate and work with one another so each of them grows. You have to learn those lessons early on for people to be able to do that. That's why you're sharing these, is because you've literally seen the multiplication of it. Is it easy? Hell no. Is it worth it? Yes. Because we just left a monthly meeting 2 days ago where in front of the entirety of your staff, this vast group of people on all different leadership levels, operators, recruiters, admins, people who are working up front, behind the scenes, making things happen from payroll to HR across the board. And I walked away from that meeting, Aaron, and I go, there's more to be done, which is a key part of vision, always. If you can't cast more, be done. And I walked away going, we're going to crush this. We're going to go after that. And here's the thing. I don't think it was just my feeling. I think that because of that collaboration, that most people walked away going, I can help out more with that. I can give that person a nod. I can help over here. And I love hearing that that's what you took away from this. That's why it's vital. And, I find myself at even hosting this going, oh man, there's so much more you could share in this. And I just want to give you the kudos or say like, this is actually a reality. It's happening around here. You're putting these things into practice. And as you're doing it, it's actually going. Does it take longer than sometimes any leader would want? Yeah. But you've been transparent about saying that too. Working with people is hard, man.
Yeah.
And
that's the whole premise of everything we do. But it's and it's hard.
Yeah.
Everything about it's hard.
Yeah.
So, but you're right in that, like some of this stuff, and I think everything happens within the right timing.
Yep.
Right. But what's also true is like the sooner I could have latched onto some of that stuff and just got some good solid mentorship in that stuff. Like, I don't know, maybe I wouldn't have applied it, and maybe it was just
Sure.
the right time. But to your point, the sooner that you can hear some of this stuff, the sooner it might make an impact.
Yeah.
So.
One of the things that we often talk about behind the scenes, it fills so many of our different text threads, especially, with the equity partners within Bolt, the company that I have the privilege of running, is our faith. Mm-hmm. And the last lesson that you want to share with people today is rooted in the scriptures. You've applied it, you've learned it, but you've also taken that and put it into both business practices and life practices. Yeah. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so, there's probably a bunch of different scriptures we could quote on this, and I'm not going to quote it. Yeah. I was going to try, but I'm just not going to. So Proverbs 21:20.
Yeah, I'll read it.
Go ahead.
Yeah, Proverbs 21:20 says, "A wise man saves for the future, but a foolish man spends whatever he gets."
Mm-hmm. So here's what I thought was interesting is we were putting all these out. It's like, okay, that first one, first lesson was like right at the beginning of even days before my recruiting career started.
Yeah.
These other two that we shared on it from Andy and Ed were later on in my career. I was over a decade into business and had some success.
Yeah.
But had much to learn, as I still do now. I'm learning every day. And then this last one that we're sharing, Proverbs 21:20.
Yeah.
Well, this is something that, I grew up a pastor's kid. I've been in the church for, since I can remember.
Right.
Now, that doesn't mean that I behaved well like that. I did not.
Sure.
But interestingly enough, like some of that core stuff was pounded into my head at a young age. And even if I didn't like implement it all, it was still there, right? So we could talk about all kinds of things within the Bible and things I learned that it's like, hey, I know this is the right thing. I'm acting a different way, but it's kind of like, hey, you're off track, which I think was a good thing, right? Well, this one, hey, you should not spend everything you make,
Mm-hmm.
That was ingrained in me, for a couple different reasons. Like my family went through a period of time where financially it was rough.
Yeah.
Didn't fully understand it,
Mm-hmm.
being in fifth grade and, moving, didn't fully understand it, but I came to understand it probably by seventh grade.
Okay.
I understood it better.
Got it.
And again, that ended up being a huge gift in my life because I think it motivated me in certain ways, especially like early on in my career.
Yeah.
But between learning that and some life experiences, right, there's this fundamental, okay, I get it. Like I cannot, just go burn all my money. I don't want to run out of money.
Yeah.
So, okay. So it's pretty obsessive over that from a younger age, like earlier 20s. I wasn't great at this when we started our business, and it's why I got back into a situation where I only had $6.23 to my name, which now is a good tagline or like quick story.
Yeah.
That it was down to that, like
Yeah.
in my account before we started paying ourselves.
Right.
But the other part of that is I didn't have a ton of debt at the same time. And then as started making money in business and different seasons of business, happened, having a rainy day fund ended up being immensely important multiple times. It
Yeah.
was very important when we started Spark.
Okay.
I left my other company and we came to start Spark. Not
Yep.
to go back through that whole story, but we talked about that transition, and by the first 5 months of business, like the first quarter of our full year, because we started in mid-November.
Okay.
And so by the first quarter of 2014, we had lost $250,000.
Yeah.
Well, fortunately, like I didn't spend all my money from the 4.5 years where I was making money,
right?
In this other business, and so I was able to weather that storm. That wasn't just sitting on that money. Like we had to go out and work really hard. And
Yep.
it's another episode.
Yeah.
It's number 1. Go listen to it if you haven't listened to it.
But
having that, right? And then, the farther along getting into business, like we go to a line of credit and I learn about covenants, and that's like part of this is setting you up on a good, like the bank wants to make sure they get their money back, right? Well, they want to set you up with some good principles on this, and it's right back to the Bible there. It's like, hey, like you need to hold this, like you need this much equity in the business to have this line of credit.
Yep.
This was foreign to me. So there's levels to this. Like I was saving some money personally. I wasn't spending it all.
Right.
But in my first business, and before we went to a traditional line of credit at Spark, I was still ripping out the whole distribution.
Got it.
And then we just kind of run it up the next quarter.
Okay.
And we were growing enough in the way that we were funding the business prior to going on a traditional line. We were able to cash flow it. We were able to do that. We were making enough money and good enough at sales every quarter where we could weather that. And we also were not the mix of being able to do that. And then we were doing that up to maybe like 25 people or so, maybe 30 people were able to do it.
Yep.
Well, moving to that line of credit and learning this about covenants was just important, because what they're doing is they're trying to get you to build up actual equity in the business. And part of that is so that if things shift, right, that you can weather a storm.
Yeah.
And so learned a lot from that. Learned a lot about that transition, because since we had no equity and we were growing and we had to grow our line and they put more restrictions on that, there was then a period of time where I went from ripping out full distributions to a period where I didn't rip out anything, because we had to build up that equity.
Right.
So I had to leave it in.
Yeah.
Outside of paying taxes.
Yeah.
Got to pay those. But so that was a transition.
Yeah.
Then we moved forward a couple of years, and I got more acumen with that and started to look at it like, hey, like we're going to do this. Like that wasn't like that made sense. We kind of built it up to where it was supposed to be. And then there was a recommended method. We would take 20% of our money that we made, and we'd be leaving that in to build up the equity. That was one of the things the bank talked to me about.
Right.
I think that's a really good thing to consider within your business, whether you have a line or not. Well, because we were doing it more extreme, there were points where I'm just like, hey, let's leave more in. Let's grow the equity in the business.
Right.
And it got to a point, this was not a 1-year thing, but over a season of being disciplined on that and doing that, we got into a situation kind of it was during COVID, right, where we had a dip, and then it came back.
Okay.
But we were able to weather that storm, right, because like businesses just shut down. Right? And it came back pretty quick, but like, again, we were prepared for something like that. Well, as we kind of come back and things pop back pretty quickly on that from a staffing perspective, we started to see how we could pay off our line of credit.
Yeah.
And that's what we decided to do.
Yep.
And now we hold no debt. as a company. Like we have a lease and that kind of
Sure.
stuff, but there's no debt
Yep.
within the business. This all comes from like, well, you can't do these things if you're spending all your money.
Yeah.
So it's true in your personal life. This is super important within business. Like, not going to get into names, but I'm getting calls right now. I had one Wednesday night,
Okay.
and I've had 3 or 4 similar calls to this. This one was the most extreme, but got a call from someone, and we're hearing that the company that they work at, I have no experience with this,
Right.
but what I'm hearing is that there was a default on a bank loan,
Okay.
and that this company's customers are getting called, and there's concern about who's going to pay the people working at these entities, right? Because
Wow.
it's the staffing company that apparently hasn't paid, right?
Okay.
So I don't know the whole situation,
Right.
but how does that happen when a company's making money? That's a question. Well,
Yeah.
are they making money just on paper, or have they actually collected the cash? You know, if they're on accrual and they're just booking profits, but then they don't collect the money,
Right. That's a problem.
well, you're gonna have to write that off as a loss
Yeah.
at some point. But let's say they are collecting it, right? Well, if that's happening, but then you are ripping out all the money, you could break your covenants if they have them on their line of credit, or if business changes, right? And now they have all this overhead expense and not the revenue coming in against it, and they don't have a rainy day fund, you can find yourself flipped upside down pretty quick.
Yeah.
It can also happen if you grow really quick.
Yeah.
I don't think that's the instance that I'm talking about here, but the framework for not letting that stuff happen, understanding like too much is given, much is required.
That's right.
So the more you're growing a business or your personal finances, like the more that this stuff comes into play.
Yeah.
You know, the bigger you got a family or the bigger your company gets, like the levels of responsibility on that, you know, continue to go up.
Yeah.
And the ramifications for not doing it well get heavier and heavier.
Yeah.
So
I,
sorry, that was long-winded.
It was good. I wrote down as we were talking about this Proverbs 11:16. It says this: strong men retain riches, and I'm paraphrasing certainly. You know, the principle there is that you have to watch your spending. You have to make sure that you're spending money in the right places, and the opposite of spending is savings. And as you do that, I think the principle that you share, especially for young entrepreneurs that haven't weathered those storms, that maybe they just exploded in growth and they're not being wise about, you know, taking some of those things and putting it away for that moment. We've all known in business, it's not always good. I mean, we had a freak flash flood, AKA, in the last, few years. Nobody expected a pandemic. And we won't do an episode on if we agree with the pandemic or not, but we'll all hear about it in the next few years, certainly, or the next few months. And people didn't see that coming. And a lot of businesses had to close because they didn't make the wise financial moves. They didn't set things aside.
Sure.
And I'm thankful.
Well, don't get me the world. Yeah, this is where you could think what you want about the Bible, but
Yeah.
Here's an example of the Bible not steering you wrong.
Yeah.
Because how does marketing work? How does the world work? What is spend?
Yep.
Spend. Everything's in front of you. Shiny object syndrome, comparison,
Yep.
this, that. Everything to put pressure on you to spend every dollar you have.
Yeah.
And what does that do? That makes you more susceptible to pain, to
greater loss.
loss,
Yep.
to
Turmoil.
issues in your business, in your relationships, in your marriage, like
Yep.
in your family, like on and on and on and on.
Yeah.
I happen to think that's somewhat by design.
Yeah.
So that's why that's a great you want to find the best business lessons. I know we just went through my four, right?
Yeah.
But a great place to start is just reading the Bible.
Yeah, I agree.
So, it's my opinion.
Yeah.
At least.
Eight years of seminary would have told me the same thing, or at least Bible college and seminary. But Aaron, these are great lessons, and I know that you have many more to share. I'm stoked for a 2.0 on this. We'll give it a little bit of time because this one is going to take some time with people to marinate. But today's been a great episode of Sparking Success, and I'm thankful. Anything you want to wrap up with today?
If you haven't already, please subscribe. It
Yeah.
helps us out. Like, share it with somebody. If you get a good episode, if you could share it with at least one other person, we'd appreciate that. And, you may be in a different season or a tough time on, this kind of stuff right now. And it's like, there's blessings within that, even though it doesn't feel like it in the moment, because some of that can be shaping you for, again, to much is given, much is required.
Yep.
Well, going through some of that and experiencing that and knowing you don't want to experience it again, or looking at it like, hey, what choices did I make that contributed to putting me into this position, right?
Yeah.
Well, okay, as I work out of it, what lessons am I going to take from that so I don't, have to go through that cycle again?
Yeah.
Or there's going to be storms in our life, right?
Yeah.
But like, how prepared are we for those storms?
Yeah.
And so if we weren't prepared in the season, or we're learning, or going through a tough time, try and take the lessons from it.
That's
when
right.
you get on the other side of that, those are value. Like there's value in some of the pain we go through. There's things that we should be pulling from that. Like, things aren't always going to be perfect, and I think it's designed that way because you learn in both states.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Great wisdom, great content, great thoughts, great lessons that you've learned that other people can apply. Thanks for sharing today, Aaron.
absolutely.